You
Would you
recently
guys
got
mind?
the...
Sorry, I've been talking so much. I'm a little thirsty. Would you mind if I just take a break here? Just real
Yeah.
quick and
Oh.
enjoy a refreshing, cool drink of water out of my favorite mug.
I think we might have to let that happen. I normally don't like to do that. I think normally I like to keep my guests a little thirsty, keeps them on edge. I like that, destabilized. But
Delicious. It's just delicious.
Ian, have I talked about how shameless it is that you're just promoting your book in the background like that? I don't believe in that kind of shameless promotion. It's just...
I fully agree with you. I don't think any of us at any point should shamelessly indulge in that kind of behavior.
Because, I mean, it's not about making money. None of this is. No, it's about the
It's
love of
about
the
the
game.
marketplace of ideas,
Yes.
right? It's about the marketplace of ideas. I personally, as an avid fan and consumer of China Uncensored, hope more people will make the correct decision and watch your show and listen to podcasts like this. It has nothing to do with, any kickbacks you guys might be giving me.
We are not giving Ian kickbacks. FYI, internet.
Or any free merch that you may or may not send my office.
That's
Hint,
right.
hint, wink, wink. Warmly welcome.
And you too can get merchandise on ChinaUncensored.tv/merchandise. It's not free. Well, it's good that you're having this cool drink of water because I know you just got back from some field research in Taiwan, so you must be tired and thirsty. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I was in Taiwan for about 10 days with a couple colleagues, and what we were doing was to try to talk to as many people as we could in Taiwan to get their sense of the threat picture that they face and how do they see it? How do they see the threat from the PLA? How do they see the situation they're in? How might they be reforming their military strategy or their military posture to respond? And I think importantly, how do they see the United States? And what more can the US and Taiwan do together? Because I'm a big believer in collective security. I think if we are not constantly trying to develop a closer relationship with our allies, and especially democracies in danger like Taiwan, then we're taking risks that we don't want to take, and we're missing opportunities that we don't want to miss. I mean, can you imagine, just by way of example, can you imagine how different our response to the COVID-19 pandemic might have been, and how many lives might have been saved in our country? How many American lives might have been saved had we a closer working relationship with the Taiwanese government, especially their health authorities? I mean, just look at how wonderfully they handled that mega disaster and how resilient their society was in the face of that. They outperformed almost any other country in the world. And we did not learn the lessons from that, again, because we don't have a closer relationship. And so that's, I think, one area among many where we're losing potentially very important life and death kind of opportunities, the kinds of opportunities that might save a lot of lives, by not having a closer relationship like that. That was the trip. That was why we were there. We're working on some research products. We're going to be having a conference in Washington, D.C. Next week to talk about some of these kinds of issues and to talk a little bit about some of our findings from the research and from the interviews. And then we're going to be having more events later in the summer or early in the fall. And if you guys are free, we would love to have you there. Love to have you participate.
In Taiwan.
I know you're very busy. No, this will all be in Washington. Or actually, technically, our office is in Arlington, Virginia, right across the Potomac. So that's where it'll be. Yeah.
There is nothing more that I love than going to a swamp in the middle of summer.
Yeah, it's refreshing, isn't it? You don't even have to drink water. All you have to do is breathe in the humidity, and you're fully hydrated.
Bottle that. Now, one idea I've heard thrown around a bit is the idea that China has 3 Pearl Harbors. Can you tell me about that?
Yes. So there's a chapter in my book, The Final Struggle, where I talk about this tendency to mirror
Wait.
image.
In your new book, Final Struggle, available now on Amazon and local
And
retailers.
wherever books are sold. Yes. So there's a chapter where I make this argument, and I could be wrong about this, by the way, but this is just an argument, and I say this. I'm not a historian, so I'm not qualified to make any, you know, official pronouncements on Chinese history. But I have a working hypothesis, and or a theory. The theory is that if we want to understand the Chinese Communist Party, it might not hurt to indulge in a little pop psychology, right? Again, I'm not a historian and I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not qualified to give any solid science based advice. But I would say that if we want to have this understanding, if we want to achieve strategic empathy, right, to be able to put ourselves in our adversary's shoes or his boots, not to sympathize, not to agree with, but to be able to see the world as much as we can through his eyes, so we know better what to do and how to, you know, how to prepare for what he may be planning to do, then it might not hurt to have a basic sense of history. And so, where did the CCP come from? Most people, when they think of China, when they think of modern China, they think of the People's Republic of China, which was established on October 1st, 1949, right? That's where most of our history books start, where most of our understanding of the current regime start. But that's not where the current regime started. The current regime started in the early 1920s. And there were a number of very, very traumatic instances, things that happened to the CCP. It's uh, kind of these foundational experiences that I think help explain, perhaps more than anything else, the drivers of CCP behavior today. And there were 3 Pearl Harbors. Maybe Pearl Harbor is not a perfect analogy. No analogy is ever perfect, but 3 Pearl Harbors, 3 massive strategic shocks or surprises that happened to the CCP, the early Red Army, these underground revolutionaries at the time, that almost destroyed the CCP, almost drove it into extinction. In each case, they suffered between, I think, 84 and 95% attrition, casualties, where they lost almost all of their manpower. The first time, I think they lost about 84% of all CCP members. Another time they lost 90%. Another time they lost 94, 95% of all of their personnel in each of these attacks. And it almost destroyed the CCP. The first one happened in the summer, April of 1927. The next one happened in April of 1934. And excuse me, April 31. And then in August of 34, the third one happened. And each of these attacks, these were attacks from Chiang Kai-shek's forces, surprise attacks. Each one almost destroyed the CCP. And I think they shaped and warped the CCP's character over time.
Well, then the CCP did the long march, which was themselves an attempt to regroup, but also they lost a lot of people, of their own people, through their own doing on that march.
Yes, so that's actually the third Pearl Harbor, is the long march. So in October of 34, Chiang Kai-shek's forces, the KMT, the Nationalist Army, the ROC Army, they had Mao and Zhou Enlai and the CCP, the Red Army, they had them surrounded down in the Jiangxi Soviet, down in southeastern China. They had them completely surrounded through a series of encirclements, and they had them outnumbered 10 to 1. 10 to 1. Chiang Kai shek's forces numbered about 800,000 at the time. The Red Army numbered about 80,000. And through a series of incredible breaks, and they all came about through good intelligence and some very bold and daring black ops or covert operations, the CCP was able to break out of the encirclement. First of all, they were able to discover the fact that they were being encircled and that Chiang Kai-shek was about to deliver the death blow, using his 10 to 1 superiority. They discovered it through spies that they had in Chiang Kai-shek's camp. Then they were able, once they realized they were completely surrounded, they were able to find a weak point in Chiang Kai-shek's lines. They were able to use spies to exploit that weak point, and then they got a passage out of this siege network that the ROC army had established. And then they set off on what became euphemistically known or termed as the Long March. And it's funny, isn't it, how that kind of has a romantic flair to it. It's remembered as this kind of this romantic episode in the history of the CCP, but actually it was a total blood-soaked disaster that they started with about 80,000. A year later, by the time they got to Yan'an and reestablished a base area there, they had about 5,000 guys left. So you're talking about incredible casualties.
Yeah, many of them also just deserted.
They did. Absolutely. Yeah. They deserted, they defected. It was, and of course, many were killed along the way as well.
Right,
they succumbed to disease. But can you imagine an army of 80,000 being absolutely decimated and driven down to about 5,000 survivors at the end, and then having the gall or the gumption to rewrite history and portray it as some kind of brilliant, brave, romantic episode in the history of the party? It's pretty remarkable. And I think this is maybe an example of how good China's government is at propaganda. But again, I think this is a third Pearl Harbor, where they just barely, by the skin of their teeth, barely held on and survived. And they did it because of espionage and intelligence and black ops. And so today we're up against a regime that places a tremendous value on these types of activities. And so there's a side to the PLA and to the Chinese government that we can see and we can measure, right? We can measure the number of ships, the number of missiles, the ranges of the missiles, whether they're hypersonic or not, how many dudes they have in uniform. These are all things that we can measure. We're comfortable with these types of things. What's more uncomfortable, I think, when you look at where the CCP is and what they've been able to do, is the fact that there's an entire different side to it. It's one that you guys are familiar with. You've spoken a lot on your show about Chinese intelligence and United Front work and all their clandestine operations. But I think in general, that message is still, this is still something that's understudied. And I think most students of China have not yet reached a full appreciation for how big of a deal this is and how important it is to the Chinese government and how good they might be at doing what they do and what the implications for us are.